Welcome everybody to this side event for the 20th Permanent Forum on Indigenous Issues to present the first global massive open online course on Indigenous people's rights. But first of all, congratulations on the 20th anniversary of the Permanent Forum on Indigenous Issues. The Permanent Forum continues to be young and vibrant, not least thanks to the contributions of Indigenous young leaders who continue to join the Indigenous movement, and also younger generations of UN workers, state civil servants, academics, foundations, and NGOs that join the efforts to implement the vision of the UN Declaration on the Rights of Indigenous Peoples. From the early days of Indigenous peoples representatives coming to the UN, they always found the opportunity to organize their own training events in Geneva before meetings of the Working Group on Indigenous Populations since the early 1980s. Such capacity building seminars have since become a feature both in Geneva and in New York since the establishment of the Permanent Forum on Indigenous Issues. The organization Indigenous Peoples' Rights International, in its annual report for this year on criminalization, violence, and impunity against Indigenous peoples, states that, quote, Indigenous peoples who are not aware of their rights or are unaware of proper legal procedures are taken advantage of and subjected to further criminalization, illegal arrest, and other forms of human rights abuse, unquote. Thus, trainings and education on Indigenous peoples' rights have been expanding over the years among Indigenous peoples. An international training center of Indigenous peoples was established in 1996 in Greenland by the late Ingmar Egede and held trainings for a number of years. The International Indigenous Women's Forum, FIMI, established the Global School of Indigenous Women's Leadership in the past years. And Tepteba last year established Elatia, the Indigenous Peoples Training Institute. Before the Permanent Forum sessions, training courses have been organized by DOSIP and by Tribal Link Foundation. Our sister Pamela Kraft, the dedicated founder and executive director of Tribal Link, passed on just a couple of weeks ago, and we honor her memory and unwavering dedication to the cause of Indigenous peoples as we gather together today. We soon realized that training and learning had to expand to many other sectors, not only among Indigenous peoples. At United Nations level, trainings have been organized for UN agencies and government officials in some countries. Occasionally in academia, Indigenous peoples' rights are taught. For example, at Columbia, we offer a course on Indigenous peoples' rights during the academic year, and we also have an annual immersion summer program on Indigenous peoples' rights and policy for people from around the world. 2 years ago, there was also an initiative of the Permanent Mission of Ecuador in New York to have a training for diplomats during the Permanent Forum on Indigenous Issues session, and our Institute for the Study of Human Rights collaborated in that. What is the philosophy here? The philosophy is that after the adoption of the declaration, all actors interested in and working with Indigenous peoples, all should have the knowledge so as to be able to engage and relate with Indigenous peoples based on the rights recognized in the declaration. In other words, Indigenous peoples themselves, government officials, United Nations and other intergovernmental organizations officials, foundations, NGOs, private sector, students, and researchers. However, again, many of us have realized that there is a huge need for many more learning spaces on Indigenous people's rights. So the idea of a MOOC, of a massive open online course, was cultivated within the Institute for the Study of Human Rights, and we were delighted that the provost of Columbia University approved our proposal so we could create this course. The preparation took about 14 months of group work, and the course was ready and open to the public on the 28th of October, 2020. While in-person learning is irreplaceable, in the meantime, the pandemic caught up with us, and this remote learning tool became even more useful. The course is designed for a wide audience, the many sectors I just mentioned above, and it also has a global lens. Today, more than 2,155 people have been taking the course from at least 110 countries. And I was elated when a few days after we opened the course, I received a message from the CEO of a foundation who wanted to register all the staff of the foundation to take the course. I would like to express my deep thanks on behalf of the Institute to the 6 persons who paused their very busy schedules to provide expert interviews for the course. Andrea, Carmen, Executive Director of the International Indian Treaty Council of the Yaki Nation. Sheryl Lightfoot, Associate Professor, Political Science, School of Public Policy and Global Affairs, and First Nations and Indigenous Studies at the University of British Columbia, and newly elected member of the Expert Mechanism on Indigenous Peoples' Rights, Anishinaabe Nation. Aehshatu Manu, Secretary General, African Indigenous Women's Organization, Central African Network, Bororo, Cameroon. Cecilia Ramirez, Coordinator of the Global School for Indigenous Women, International Indigenous Women's Forum, FIMI, Mixteco, Nu Sao, Mexico. Elifuraha Laltaika, Law Lecturer at Tumaini University, Makumira, Arusha, Masai from Tanzania. And Binalakshmi, or Bina, Nepram, founder, Manipur Women Gun Survivors Network and Global Alliance of Indigenous Peoples, Gender Justice and Peace, Manipuri from India. I would also like to thank all those that kindly offer photographs for the visual enrichment of this course, FIMI, Pawanka Fund, the Center for Support of Indigenous Peoples of the North, Russian Indigenous Training Center, and my colleague from the Secretariat of the Permanent Forum, Brody Sigurdarsson, for his beautiful pictures. And actually 29 pages of credits to pictures, to visual material are included in this course. And from Colombia, I would like to thank the Center for Training and Learning and its founder and director, Maurice Matisse, and all his dedicated staff for the extraordinary support for this project. Of course, the pandemic caught up with us and we couldn't meet right at the moment where we were about to start filming the lectures. So the added challenge was that the team had to teach me how to use Zoom to do that at home. And I'm sure the quality would have been far better if they had done the filming themselves. I would like to thank my colleague Stephanie Grepo, Director of Capacity Building, whose idea led us to this course. And last but not least, Caroline Donmetz, our Institute's alumna, who is our assistant during this course. She follows the participants' discussions and questions on the electronic platform and provides comments and responses in the most professional and caring manner. Before I invite our speakers to share their reflections, I would like to say just a couple of words about how the course was conceptualized. We had to fit the complex and extensive material on Indigenous people's rights in 5 modules, which I must say was a challenge. Our guidance for the topics and approach was the way Indigenous peoples themselves have articulated and internationalized their issues in the past 50 years, from human rights to environment, traditional knowledge, development, climate change, and other areas. Module 1 is an overview of the Indigenous people's rights movement and its achievements at the international level, with special focus on the adoption of the UN Declaration on the Rights of Indigenous Peoples and the internationalization of Indigenous people's issues. An expert interview is given here by Andrea Carmen. The next 3 modules focus on the 3 pillars of the declaration, namely right to self-determination, right to lands, territories, and resources, and cultural rights. Module 2 is therefore on the right to self-determination. It covers the historic significance of this right, how it is reflected in the declaration, what role does free, prior, and informed consent play in the exercise of this right? How does the issue of treaties between states and indigenous peoples fit under the right to self-determination? What is self-determined development for indigenous peoples? How are indigenous peoples' rights reflected in the Sustainable Development Goals? An expert interview here is provided by Professor Sheryl Lightfoot. Module 3 on the right to lands, territories, and resources covers the significance of this right for indigenous peoples, especially that of collective ownership of lands, territories, and resources. What are the main points on land rights in the declaration, including subsistence rights, restitution, and compensation? How do indigenous peoples impact on international environmental and climate change debates? Expert interviews here are given by Sandra Creamer, board member of the International Indigenous Women's Forum, who is Wani Kalkadoon from Australia, Aehshatu Manu, and Platon Shamayev, lawyer from the Sahara Public Russian Federation. Module 4 focuses on cultural rights. It first discusses why cultural rights have been neglected and what are some violations of cultural rights that indigenous peoples face. What are the responses of the UN Declaration? What are the borders between individual and group rights? How is indigenous traditional knowledge protected? And the significance and role of cultural rights in mending historical injustices. Expert interviews here are given by Cecilia Ramirez and also by Aviaya Egede-Lunge, who is Inuk from Greenland. Module 5, the final one, covers the indigenous related UN bodies, their mandates and concrete work, and stresses the significance of human rights advocacy. The module therefore discusses the Permanent Forum on Indigenous Issues, the Special Rapporteur on the Rights of Indigenous Peoples, and the UN Expert Mechanism on the Rights of Indigenous Peoples. And expert interviews here are given by Andrea Carmen, Elifuraha Laltaika, Binalakshmi Nepram. An extensive bibliography and visual material are also offered through this course. I would now like to turn to the speakers who will speak from their own perspectives on questions such as the significance of spreading knowledge of indigenous people's rights and of the indigenous people's movement, the role of online learning and contribution of academia, significance of accessible human rights education for all, the role of continuous learning for sustaining the indigenous movement. And as we go forward, please, you can put your questions in the chat. So without further ado, I would like now to turn to Stephanie Grepo, who is the Director of Capacity Building at the Institute for the Study of Human Rights at Columbia University. Stephanie, please.
Elsa, thank you so much. Greetings to my fellow speakers and to everyone who joined us today. Elsa asked me to speak with you about the backstory of the MOOC. How did the MOOC come about? Maggie, please, the next slide. Thank you. So I run the Human Rights Advocates Program at the Institute for the Study of Human Rights. Just in brief, ATRAP is the flagship fellowship program at ISHR. It's been in existence since 1989. Prior to the pandemic, it was a one-semester in-person program at Columbia University. We offer students 4 pillars: classwork, mentoring, skill-based workshops. There are 4 pillars, so sorry. Courses, workshops, mentoring, and workshops. So sorry. For the past 30 years, we were averaging about 350 applications per program. The application pool is always excellent. Traditionally, anywhere from 25 to 40% of the pool is shortlisted. That is the quality of the pool that we're working with. The problem is we only admit 8 to 10 people per program. Maggie, next slide, please. What to do? I every year had so many wonderful people applying, and I would actually tell people, we're rejecting you. It has nothing to do with your application. You are outstanding. It is just that I am limited by the space in the program. And I started thinking about other ways. What could we possibly do to work with all of these advocates around the world to bring the expertise at ISHR, at Columbia, from within our alumni community to the world at large? And I had been following the Center for Teaching and Learning at Columbia University. I made an appointment to learn more about MOOCs, how they work, what could possibly be done. After the initial meeting, I was encouraged to look at an RFP from the provost office, by the provost office, to support MOOCs. And as I put on this slide, the purpose of the funding, as you can see in bold, is to reach global audiences, make more visible the teaching and research activities of the university while promoting public engagement. This fit so well with what we've been doing at ISHR, in ATRAP, and also what I had hoped to do, building upon ATRAP and reaching out to even more people. So I had 5 consultations totaling more than 10 hours with CTL, and I spoke with Elsa, and we decided, yes, let's go forward. Let's do a MOOC on Indigenous people's rights. I will never forget the conversation I had with Elsa. She said, Stephanie, this is a gift to the world. And I thought, yes, this really will be a gift. So we applied in the spring of 2019, and we won a grant from the provost office. We received $20,000 US. And more importantly, the most important thing, we won access to the resources of CTL, the expertise there, the knowledge within CTL. It was not a straight shoot from winning the money, from winning the RFP to launching it on edX in October 2020. The following speaker, Maurice, will talk about all that went into building it, but I will move on since I was asked to speak about the backstory. Maggie, please, the next slide. Where are we today? So since it launched on October 28th, 2020, we have 22,165 learners. 525 have verified enrollment. Auditors have free access for 10 weeks. The average age, the age of the average learner is 32. The youngest is 15 and the oldest is 74. At least 110 countries are represented in the pool. And in any given week in March of 2021, there were more than 120 active learners. What I'd like to leave you with from my side today, don't get caught up in how to do this. Don't think, well, I need to win $20,000. No, there are ways to get your incredible knowledge out there. Look at other places like YouTube. Talk with your colleagues, talk with fellow experts, talk with the people you meet at the permanent forum. Think about ways you can share what you have with the world at large. And that, in the final slide, is my message to you. I've also left you with my email address, and feel free to reach out at any time with any questions about any of the programs we run at ISHR. Thank you.
Thank you so much, Stephanie, for revealing the backstory of this course. I really appreciate that. And I would now like to turn to my colleague, Maurice Matisse, who was one of the columns of this amazing effort. Maurice, please.
Thank you very much, Elsa, and thank you very much for having me. My name is Maurice Matisse, and I'm a senior director here at the Center for Teaching and Learning. I represent a dedicated team of professors at the Center for Teaching and Learning who produced the course. So I'm speaking on behalf of all of us. My role in the course was to oversee the production of the course, and I'm going to try to answer a few questions today during the my presentation. The main questions are, why does Colombia have a program like this? How the courses are selected, what has happened since the course launch, and what are some of the key ingredients for building a successful course. First, to talk about why Colombia has such a program, we try to showcase faculty and our programs. It is used as a method for attracting students from all over the world to all our programs, not just the free programs that you see in edX, but also some of our on-campus and distance learning programs. We have been trying to make use of the online world to help us improve the teaching on campus. We have leveraged much of the knowledge we have gained in using online courses to do experiments here on campus. And again, this is something that's very valuable for our local students, but also things that we turn into our online programs. We also have an interest in sharing knowledge with the world. It happens to be one of the main tenets of the mission of the university. And I think this is something similar to what Stephanie mentioned. And we also are very interested in fostering lifelong learning programs for our alumni. So we connect with our alumni to make use of some of these programs. How is this process completed? Maybe just a little bit more detail on how it works. There is a request for proposal that the provost office sends out every spring. Proposals are reviewed by a faculty committee who makes the final recommendations to the provost for acceptance. And again, as Stephanie mentioned, this was an award that was given in spring 2019 for the Indigenous Peoples' Rights course. The awards can be up to $25,000 for a MOOC production, and it also gets in-kind support from our center. That includes project management, learning design, media production, and learning management systems setup and maintenance. What have we seen? What has happened since the course launched? Again, a little repeat of a couple of items that Stephanie mentioned, but one of the things that's been very interesting for us has been the number of verified certificates we have gotten. That's about 25% of the total students, which is much higher than most of our MOOCs. One of the things that's not here is the discussion forum participation. It also has been very, very rich. We have had quite a few folks submitting answers to the various prompts that we have. We have a TA that is covered through the grant, Carolyn, who has been tremendous in supporting the learners. And again, that creates a lot of activity in the discussion forums. What goes into producing a course like this? And I think these are some of the key ingredients. I think one of the key elements is a dedicated and patient instructor. And I think we have a lot of thanks for Elsa for her very dedicated and focused effort on this course. We received a very well-conceived course syllabus that was at the right length. I think the 5 weeks is something we try to do for some of the MOOCs, 5 or 6 weeks, so that learners will stay with the course. I think also endurance is very important because the production process is quite lengthy. In this case, it was even longer because we hit the COVID pause right when we were about to begin doing some of the studio shooting. And again, that is something that we have to have faculty that are willing to stay with the process, and this process was well over a year. We also are very interested in courses that target a very specific audience so that it is well-defined and people can find themselves in the description in the catalog. We try to work with the faculty to create activities that learners will find motivating. I think it helps the course be very active, and again, that takes time and working with our learning designers in making that happen. For some of our best courses, one of the best things that we've been able to do is get and recruit guest experts that really add a tremendous value to their different perspectives. This is certainly the case in this course. I want to take maybe a minute and a half to play the trailer for the course. So for anybody who has not joined the course, can maybe look at this and decide to join. I'll play that.
Indigenous peoples are estimated to number some 476 million. They represent as many as 5,000 different indigenous cultures. In this course, I would like to share with you the story of how and why Indigenous peoples' rights have become an issue of international concern, and how the global Indigenous movement prompted and sustains that concern. We all have a lot to learn from Indigenous peoples and their philosophies and their resilience.
To enable us to do our work, it is really important to know what are the different mandates at the UN, different mechanisms at the UN, and how do we get it done there?
In every area in the UN, there's just so many areas that Indigenous people's input is considered not just important, but essential.
Without education about Indigenous people's rights, it's very, very difficult to implement them and also respect their rights. And we also have to remember that information is power and information is empowerment.
So that's the trailer for the course. I also have a slide here that has the URL, which is also behind me. And one of the interesting things that we do with our MOOCs is we also make the videos available on our YouTube channel. Here's the channel, and those videos are released under a Creative Commons license, so they can be reused by other folks. And if you're interested in looking for those, again, the URL is listed there. Let me stop my share. That's the end of my talk, and I would be happy to answer any questions at the end.
Thank you so much, Maurice, and also for reminding that one of the elements of the MOOC is to sustain the effort for some time, because it does take a long time. And your team is a perfectionist, fantastic team. So that was a good experience for me. I would now like to turn to Andrea Carmen of the Yaki Nation, Executive Director of the International Indian Treaty Council, a great leader during the drafting of the Declaration and beyond, and a true educator on Indigenous people's rights. Andrea.
Respectful greetings to you all, my relatives. And when I see you, Elsa, I'm always reminded of when we met each other back in the 1980s at the Working Group on Indigenous Populations, what young ladies we were. As my very good friend, Jackie Borlito used to say, we started this work when we were young mothers, and now we're young grandmothers. And some of us are getting to the age where we're soon going to be young great-grandmothers, still doing this work. So I just want to give my heartfelt thanks to seeing you again, and that we're both still plugging away, at the rights of Indigenous peoples. I'm going to just talk very briefly about the importance of the global Indigenous movement for the work at the United Nations. And just to emphasize that every single thing that we've achieved at the UN has not been given to us. It was never gifted on a silver platter. It's something that we worked for, and we took our movement from the grassroots in our homelands to the halls of the United Nations for the achievements we made. And this, of course, are the drummers in Geneva in 1977 in front of the globe there. And this symbolizes how we took who we are and maintain true to who we are to achieve what we've achieved at the United Nations, fighting for a place at the table. Next slide, please. for the work of the International Indian Treaty Council, which was the first Indigenous organization to be recognized with consultative status, it came out of the movement of the American Indian struggle in the 1960s and 70s for fishing rights, for recognition of treaty rights and land rights. We occupied Alcatraz Island. We walked across the country at least 3 times. And of course, Leonard Peltier is still in prison from the repression that resulted from these days. Next slide, please. So when the International Indian Treaty Council was founded on Standing Rock Reservation, which now everyone's heard of Standing Rock, in 1974, about 5,000 delegates from not just the United States and Canada, but from throughout the Americas attended. And this instruction of the elders and leaders was to seek a voice at the family of nations, of the United Nations, where we weren't represented because specifically our rights were not being respected and there was no redress for the violation of our rights within the justice systems, the courts, the legal systems of the countries that had established themselves on our homeland, such as the United States, Canada, Mexico, Guatemala, etc. And one of our core principles that was our founding principle that we continue today is that Indigenous people should speak for and represent themselves before the world community. This is still the most important tenet for not just the affiliates of International Indian Treaty Council, but for all of the Indigenous peoples that are there. Until we began to participate, it was the countries that spoke for us, if anybody even spoke at all about Indigenous peoples. These are 2 of our youth representatives speaking at the UN Expert Mechanism on the Rights of Indigenous Peoples on access to justice for Indigenous youth. So it's an example of giving the voice to those that are the experts, the true experts, the Indigenous peoples that can speak to our own issues. Next slide, please. The first Indigenous conferences in Geneva were organized in 1977 and 1981. And you can see many of our leaders and founders there in front marching into the United Nations for the first time. This was a very important movement. And again, it came from the movement on the ground in our homelands. Next slide, please. At these conferences, and the 1977 is some more pictures, and actually Elsa provided me with these pictures. You can see the Indigenous peoples there at the UN for the first time. Actually, the development of a United Nations Declaration on Collective Rights of Indigenous Peoples was called for, a permanent body for Indigenous peoples. Because before that, we didn't have that. There was no body or mechanism focusing on Indigenous peoples, and also a call to draft a new International Labor Organization declaration or covenant, collective rights of Indigenous peoples was called for. Next slide, please. The working group on Indigenous populations came out of this movement. And it was the first body that was brought about at the United Nations. And that's where, of course, the original UN Declaration on the Rights of Indigenous Peoples that we fought to hold on to for 30 years with minimal changes. But also it gave birth to all of the other bodies and mechanisms that we now have recognizing the rights of Indigenous peoples. But maybe one of the most important things that it did was not something that happened because of the United Nations, but it happened because Indigenous peoples from all the different regions very soon began to participate. And it was a global Indigenous movement that still carries us to this day on every achievement that we've been able to make. Next slide, please. Just some of the achievements. We actually did bring about a study that, on treaties, agreements, and other constructive arrangements. We were able to take part in the development of ILO 169, which I've heard Germany just announced plans to ratify. We became one of the 9 major groups for sustainable development at the first Earth Summit in 1992. And of course, you'll be hearing a lot more about the SDGs and the Indigenous Peoples Major Group work on that. We brought about International Decade of the World's Indigenous Peoples, 2 of them. And actually, they were declared during martial law and a coup in Guatemala at an Indigenous conference there. We declared the decade and then asked the UN to support the first decade. We brought about the bodies that have been referred to and the mechanisms, the Special Rapporteur on Rights of Indigenous Peoples, the Permanent Forum, where we are all at the 20th anniversary session, and the expert mechanism on the rights of Indigenous peoples are just some examples. And the picture is important because it shows how the Indigenous movement representatives, in this case women from different countries and regions, are involved in the negotiations for what is now the UN Minamata Convention on Mercury. Just many examples, and I'm just giving you a little taste here. Next slide, please. Of course, the major achievement, the UN Declaration on the Rights of Indigenous Peoples. Of course, it is the minimum standard, which means it is not the ceiling, but it's the floor. And it's a floor we never had to stand on before, that we use every single day in our work in our homelands and also in all the UN bodies where we participate. This is a picture of the General Assembly at the moment of adoption. The green is the yes votes. There's 11 abstentions and of course 4 no votes that, because of the Indigenous movement, reversed their position in the next few years after that, including where we're sitting now, the United States. Next one, please. Next slide. And just to recall, the adoption of the UN Declaration came about with 30 years of struggle. These are just some examples. We had a major walkout of all the Indigenous peoples from the session in 1996 to demand equal participation in the negotiations, which we achieved for the first time in history. We had a hunger strike to call global attention to some of the proposals by states to actually try to undermine our rights rather than recognize them. And this other picture is on the streets of New York in the day before the adoption at the General Assembly, protesting the intended no vote of Canada in this particular case in front of the permanent mission. So this was a movement activity to bring about the declaration. So I want to honor all those that had a part. Next slide. We have been recognized now as experts in the UN system. This is Francisco Cali, who's now the UN Special Rapporteur on Rights of Indigenous Peoples, but when he was president of the CERD, and Chief Wilton Littlechild when he was chair of the MRIP, speaking to recognize this historic achievement of an Indigenous person chairing a UN treaty body. Next slide, please. These are 2 examples of other achievements where we've achieved seats in bodies that before were just states, just countries. The Civil Society Indigenous Peoples Mechanism of the UN Committee on Food Security, Representatives Saul and Ali Aehshatu, who now have seats on that body since 1994. Next slide. And I know I'm out of time, but I want to really recognize the role of the continued Indigenous movement in impacting movements of the United Nations. This is the 2nd International Indigenous Women's Environmental and Reproductive Health Symposium. The youngest delegates were 12 years old and the oldest were in their 90s. And through this symposium, we were able to get the concept of environmental violence to be recognized at the Permanent Forum for the first time. Next slide. And finally, one victory that I want to point out, this is the Indigenous movement participating in the United Nations Framework on Climate Change, the convention, the adoption of the Local Communities and Indigenous Peoples Platform Facilitative Working Group was established. And I think this picture maybe is a first, where we're there, the Indigenous representatives and the state representatives together celebrating a new step and stage in the United Nations work. And my final slide, I just want to show you the members of the facilitative working group, because this body at the UNFCCC, the adoption resolution emphasized the UN declaration is in its entirety, which, if anyone knows about the history of the UNFCCC, we weren't even allowed in the room of negotiations, say for the Paris Agreement. And then this body also is the first time ever that we've achieved equal and direct participation. The Indigenous regions selected their representatives to be part of this body, 7 of us and 7 state representatives. So I just want to let all of you know the history goes on. You're all a part of it. We need new blood. We need the young people to continue to engage so we can pass the torch for a whole new 40 and 50 years of achievements, which are sure to come. Thank you, Chokwe Utesia.
Thank you so much, Andrea. Every time I hear you speak, you come out, your energy, and it's not just the continued commitment, but it's the joy, the continuous joy. And as you said, we were young people. Now we are young grandmothers. And here we go. But we need precisely the young people. All the generations are needed. That's why also the continuous learning is really an exciting thing for all of us to share, I think. I would like now to turn to Sheryl Lightfoot, who is an Anishinaabe, a citizen of the Lake Superior Band of Ojibwe, enrolled at the Keweenaw Bay Indian Community in Baraga, Michigan. She's Canada Research Chair in Global Indigenous Rights and Politics, Associate Professor in Political Science, the School of Public Policy and Global Affairs, and also Indigenous Studies at the University of British Columbia. And she's also recently elected member from North America of the UN Expert Mechanism on Indigenous Peoples' Rights. So Sheryl, the floor is yours.
Thank you so much, Elsa, and what a privilege it is to be here today virtually. While it's not the same as seeing you in person, it will do for now, and I'm just so happy that we can have this event today and officially launch this MOOC. So I want to just open by giving you my heartiest congratulations on this launch. It's such an exciting development, and coming from another academic institution, I just have to say how much I appreciate Columbia University putting forward the funding to develop this MOOC, and it's just so exciting, and I just embrace it and applaud it with all of my heart. So thank you, Elsa, for taking the initiative. And I am joining you what is still this morning out on the West Coast on the traditional, ancestral, and unceded territory of the Musqueam people, or what we commonly refer to as Vancouver, British Columbia, when we're speaking in English terms. And I am, as Elsa said, a research professor here at the University of British Columbia, which is located squarely on Musqueam unceded traditional territory. And I've been here at University of British Columbia for about a dozen years as a research professor. And one of my main missions in coming here, and I grew up in the city of Minneapolis, so I am very, very, very far away from home on the beautiful West Coast. But the reason that I came here a dozen years ago and responded to the recruitment call was specifically the opportunity to bring Indigenous human rights and human rights education to this university. They were so excited about it 12 years ago, and there seemed to be such an opening and an excitement and a hunger for the education here. And I'm feeling very happy because when I began here in 2009, there were no courses on Indigenous human rights or the Indigenous rights movement or the UN Declaration. And so in a dozen years, we have moved from, oh no, oh no, did I lose?
No, we can still hear you.
Okay, wonderful. It looks like maybe Elsa's connection is wobbly, but
I'm back.
Okay, I'll keep talking. So I'm so happy to say that in a dozen years, we've moved from 0 courses on the UN Declaration, the Indigenous rights movement, and Indigenous human rights, to now we have a whole battery of courses, including permanent courses. And I just finished last week the very first course in the new School of Public Policy and Global Affairs that's specifically on Indigenous human rights and how they're being implemented in different frameworks around the world. And all of this is wonderful. But I want to point out that in person, we can only reach a graduate level class, about 18 to 22 students at a time, an undergrad class, and I have one here where we actually simulate the UN Permanent Forum in the class, which is an amazing experience for the undergraduate students, but we capped there at 70 because of the nature of a simulation. So in any given year, if I'm teaching a full load, I can touch about 100 students on my own. This MOOC multiplies how many people we can reach and the scope of the work. And so I am just incredibly delighted to welcome it into our circle and support the need for knowledge expansion about Indigenous human rights, the UN Declaration, and create more learning spaces. And similarly, because implementation is such a complex task around the world, and in so many ways, a deeply transformative process for governments, for civil society, and the tasks ahead of us in implementation are complex, interdisciplinary, and in many ways challenging us on legal levels, legislative levels, and policy levels. And it's just true that none of us can work in isolation and within our own disciplines or within our own universities. The task ahead of us is just too big. And many of us in the academic sphere have noted and had many discussions in the last few years about the pressing need for additional tools to monitor and to assist and to share information to support Indigenous human rights implementation everywhere around the world. And of course, one of the issues we've identified in the past 5 or so years is a strong and compelling need for more learning spaces, especially and particularly those with a global lens, because so often many of the educative tools that are available out there are unique to particular national contexts or local contexts. So I applaud the MOOC for adding the global lens to Indigenous rights education. And of course, we have pockets of folks working at different institutions. Columbia is one, my university, Auckland, and also in the Arctic for just a handful, and then a number across Canada. And so we have these pockets, but what we have been working towards in recent years is building a network of these institutions in order to amplify our research tools, and most importantly, our dissemination of products and our experience sharing. And so I was so happy, absolutely delighted to be asked to participate as an expert speaker in this MOOC. And I look forward to keeping those connections that we're creating in this network, because it's not just a network of academics that we're building. And Elsa is a part of this, and Columbia is a part of this network that we're building. We're also connecting with Indigenous organizations, and human rights NGOs, so that, again, we can amplify voice, we can spread experiences, and we can keep a sustained collaboration in place. And so, again, this MOOC plays a major role in meeting some of the dissemination needs of that network, the public education needs of Indigenous human rights mobilization, particularly so in reaching Indigenous communities and organizations. And I am, again, so excited for this launch and issue all of you my heartiest and most enthusiastic congratulations on the MOOC. And back to you, Elsa.
Sheryl, thank you so much. You are the one. I'm so glad you mentioned that these efforts have to be group efforts, because they are big efforts. And just for total transparency in the world, Sheryl is a major convener of bringing academics together who work on Indigenous people's rights globally as well. And so her university and the University of Auckland in New Zealand are also collaborating universities for us at Columbia for the summer program, the International Summer Program on Indigenous people's rights and policy. So we help each other in these big efforts. And that's how we can do some things and break some glass ceiling, so to speak. So thank you again, Sheryl. I would like now to turn to my dear friend Aehshatu Manu Bororo from Cameroon, who is Secretary General of the African Indigenous Women Organization, Central African Network. And Aehshatu is also an alumna of the Human Rights Advocates Program at the Institute for the Study of Human Rights. Aehshatu, the floor is yours.
Hello, everyone. I'm so delighted to be part of this conversation. I'm called Aehshatu Manu. I'm from Cameroon. I'm from the Boro pastoralist community. So I would like to, first of all, acknowledge all the efforts our elders have been doing to promote and protect the right of Indigenous people around the world. So Professor Elsa, I would like to really acknowledge all the efforts you have been doing to promote and protect the right of Indigenous people. So to cut it short, I would say that the significance to me of spreading this knowledge is very, very important, because it helps us to create awareness on their rights. It also makes us to understand that these rights are not just special rights, they are human rights, and that the recognition of this right and equally the respect of this right is imperative. So not just for Indigenous people, but also for the others. So to me, the elders have been into the movement for several years. We as younger generations, we are coming in to contribute to what already has been existing and also to improve what they have been doing in the years back. So spreading the knowledge on the movement help us to understand where we are coming from as Indigenous people, how far we have gone, and also to provide knowledge on how this movement functions and how they can be used in the recognition and respect of Indigenous people's rights. So to me, the movement enables us to educate and also sensitize and communicate to the Indigenous people in particular, because we need to educate ourselves first and then make sure that we share with the others who are not Indigenous to also understand the importance of respecting and promoting the right of Indigenous people. So to continue, I would say that, for example, the role of online learning is very, very important nowadays. With the advent of globalization, online learning is the way to acquire knowledge and carry out studies worldwide today. So we know that this involves new technologies, and the role it plays is that knowledge can be acquired from any part of the world within the shortest period of time, and without us displacing ourselves or being in the office and having your courses online like what is ongoing right now. So it's very, very important. But being from Africa and from the Third World War countries and from the indigenous communities in particular, we face a lot of challenges with that. So some of the challenges we face is access to new information and communication devices, because most indigenous people live in remote areas, and access to these gadgets are very challenging. They don't know how to use them. They don't know how to manipulate them. So it becomes a challenge. And then also having knowledge and skills necessary to know how to operate these gadgets, like the computers, like the phones, remains a problem. So access to reliable and affordable internet connections remains a challenge in Africa. And last but not the least, the issue of frequent power outages are some of the things that we face. So at times, indigenous people would love to really participate in these courses and gain more knowledge and skill, but the challenge remains that of what I earlier said above. So some of the good practices from remote learning that we are using with regard to the advent of the pandemic is that in response to the spread of COVID-19 pandemic, some schools have implemented remote learning. And this approach to education can prevent students from experiencing setback during school closure. So in the last 1 year, this is what some of the schools have been using in Cameroon. And many students have been privileged to use the computers and phones in order to access their classes. But the challenge still remains that of indigenous children who live in remote areas. We don't have electricity, we don't even have access to these phones and internet. So it remains a big problem. And what we have been doing is try to go towards these communities and try to see how we can encourage them to understand that the situation right now is, trying to prevent them also from getting contaminated, and also at the same time keep them going for them to continue with their education. And so there are many ways that there are many strategies we are putting in place within our organizations at the grassroots level in order for us to make sure no one is left behind, because we know that education remains a human right for all, and that no one should be left behind. So many students have been using like for Cameroon, we use the national television where teachers share with students on some of their courses, but it's still a problem. So those are some of the that we face. Just to add to the role of transmitting with both the theory and experiences around indigenous people's rights to indigenous and non-indigenous audiences. So yeah, I would say that indigenous people's rights are human rights, and they are not new rights. So people always tend to think that indigenous people's rights are special rights. They are not, they are just human rights, and we are all equal. So transmitting both theory and experience around indigenous people's rights help us facilitate so as to educate them on their right themselves, sensitize them, and communicate on this right, and that they should be aware of it. And if there is any violation, they should be able to address the challenge, the knowledge of indigenous people from maybe Africa or maybe Latin America or the Americas have been able to do. So, advocacy or struggles for recognition and respect of indigenous people's rights remains very important, and we think that the struggle should continue. So to the non-indigenous audience, I would just say that transmitting this knowledge makes them understand indigenous people's rights, know their history, and know how their rights, know how to respect this right, and avoid or stopping violations that indigenous people face with regard to their rights in the different parts of the world. So in order to promote as well peaceful cohabitation and promote social cohesion among ourselves. So ensure mutual respect among communities and understand the struggles and support of indigenous people. So I will end there for now. Maybe come back if there is any other thing to clarify. Thank you so much.
Thank you so much, Aehshatu. And I remember our discussions when you were at Columbia about the need for education and how to put this. And you brought out also certain challenges, and you also mentioned that you are putting together strategies yourselves. It will be important for us to know also how, for example, academia or the technical part of it, could help. That would be interesting. But I want jokingly to also say that not that you and I have in common, not just that we are lawyers, but we also have internet interruptions, you in Cameroon and me here in New York in Manhattan. So we have this in common as well. I would like now to turn to Cecilia Ramirez, Mixteco from NUSAU from Mexico, coordinator of the Global School for Indigenous Women, International Indigenous Women's Forum. Cecilia is also an alumna of the Human Rights Advocates Program. And for me, it's a very special pleasure every year to work with Cecilia to organize a series of seminars for Indigenous women leaders at Columbia University. So Cecilia, floor is yours.
Thank you, Professor Elsa. Ta ini nani kutauran Professor Elsa. I'd like to thank you for this invitation. I'm glad to see you and greet you, even online. I'd like to congratulate for this initiative. Congratulations to all who make possible of the course on Indigenous people's rights. I'd like to start by saying that the lack of information generates prejudices, racism, and other negative attitudes. Every action which contributes to education, to create awareness, and disseminate information in the framework of the respect of fundamental human rights is positive and very welcome. So I'm going to share my screen. And starting with the first question, I like to focus on the significance of spreading knowledge of Indigenous people's rights and of Indigenous people's movement. Multicultural societies in terms of Indigenous peoples include a wide diversity in many senses: institutions, forms of government, languages, and cultural practices, as long as they respect the universal human rights. What we know on it may help to understand others' worldview. Extremist attitudes don't help to build better societies. Instead, reinforce the racism, generating violence and destruction. This course, in my view, is creating awareness about Indigenous people's struggles, achievements, and challenges, how they understand the world, why they defend their forests, lands, or water. The Indigenous Peoples Course is a way to know why there is an Indigenous movement and link this one to others, learning to live together and how to cohabit together in order to avoid imposing a particular way of living on other people. Otherwise, the criminalization and murders of leaders, of Indigenous leaders will continue. The significance of spreading knowledge of Indigenous peoples through this course is highly important because it is essential to continue talking, discussing, and developing debates on the issues around Indigenous peoples. As we may know, despite the Indigenous people's rights have progressed at the international level, which everyone celebrates, of course, but still the violations of our rights continue. Then, where is the gap? While this is going on, the information and actions should insist in order to fulfill indigenous people's rights. And we have to keep in mind Chomsky words. I like to quote this because this means that indigenous people's struggles involves non-indigenous and indigenous societies. So this course is pertinent to indigenous communities to be aware of their rights and duties, so they will be able to share it to the rest of their communities, from the youngest child to the oldest adult. This course may be a benchmark or reference for decision makers and policy makers which acts and decisions involve indigenous people's life. The second point that I like to focus on this moment is the role of online learning and the contribution of academia, the role of transmitting both theory and experiences around indigenous people's rights to indigenous and non-indigenous audiences. In my point of view regarding online learning, a computer will never overcome the learning process in classrooms. However, this course is a good practice of distance learning on these issues and topics, while these are not addressed into the education system of those countries where indigenous peoples are located. Most of the time, indigenous peoples' territories are located in remote areas. The access to higher education is extremely expensive because we had to move to cities where this level of education is possible. So the probabilities to carry it out are nil. For instance, in Mexico, only 1 of every 100 indigenous youth can access to the university. If this course reaches people who are in these contexts, in remote areas, it would be a significant achievement. It could be a bridge to know, to demand, and to watch over the fulfillment of our collective rights. According to the contents of the course, it is also to take part in the international mechanisms to reach and advocate on them. Seeing the contents of the course, the pillars of indigenous people's rights to be aware that we, indigenous peoples, must be informed and consulted on those issues, on those actions to be implemented by our governments, to build our self-determination in a broad sense. And it is also for giving theoretical elements and experiences to continue discussing our future as peoples with letter S. The role of online learning is a tool to reach information and be aware of the achievements of the international level and disseminate to the local levels and vice versa. In terms of the movements, it is necessary this kind of platform for indigenous peoples to know, share, and good practices and how they or we are confronting our challenges. The validation of a prestigious university, it is important and add value to this debate. Indigenous people's movement is a social fact to be studied. It generates knowledge to contribute to and propose solutions on indigenous people's issues. It is a dialectical process between theory and practice. In the framework that this event is being held to the 20th session of the UN Permanent Forum, I like to emphasize on the following. This course is a good practice to be replicated by other public and private universities, especially those countries where indigenous peoples are located. Its contents are highly important to prepare them in different indigenous languages to be addressed to indigenous communities. It is important to take into consideration that courses like this on indigenous people's issues should have the participation voices of indigenous peoples and its communities. Thank you. Thank you, Professor Elsa.
Thank you so much, Cecilia, and for these very constructive recommendations, and I look forward to discussing with you and others about how to promote your recommendations. That will be great. Thank you, Cecilia. Now I would like to turn to Elifuraha Laltaika, Eli, Masai from Tanzania, law lecturer of Tumaini University, Makumira in Arusha, and also former member of the Permanent Forum on Indigenous Issues. Eli, the floor is yours. Welcome.
Thank you very much, Elsa. Can you hear me?
Yes, very good.
All right, I'll make sure we don't have something in common with regards to interruption of the internet, so mine will be uninterrupted. Well, colleagues, it's a very great honor to be an expert speaker to this very important occasion. And I would like to congratulate you, Sheryl, for the important appointment. It is very well deserved. And of course, to thank you, Elsa and Columbia, for this great occasion. The MOOC, as I would say, is very important. And I think it's not an exaggeration if I say, to echo what other speakers have said, that it can potentially change the world, especially with regards to how indigenous peoples are treated. I want to react very briefly on the topic of the significance of accessing human rights education for all, or accessible material that pertain to human rights for everyone. And in framing my presentation, I had a look at the mandates of treaty monitoring bodies to begin with. And I saw some duality where the emphasis is given both in the promotion and the protection. And I will leave the protection aspect for now, but if we untangle a little bit about the promotion, it's actually education. It's about spreading or sensitizing duty bearers on various aspects of human rights. And that tells us really that human rights education and accessible human rights education, for that matter, like the MOOC, is really an indispensable tool when it comes to human rights implementation and the human rights respect. So this is a very live topic that really connects to the wider human rights discourse from implementation, respect, and even human rights education as a core theme. And if you look at the reports of UN special rapporteurs on the rights of indigenous peoples, they are replete with the statements that lack of education, lack of awareness on the part of duty bearers is one of the important factors why human rights of indigenous peoples are not respected or implemented. And for those who have read reports of the UN Permanent Forum, specifically the expert group meeting that was held in New York. It's actually held every year, assuming there's no corona pandemic, around January. Now in January 2015, there was an expert group meeting that was highlighting the importance of implementing the UN declaration. And the report is really replete with the admission that lots of duty bearers are not aware of what indigenous people's rights are. And therefore, really, it's important that we have accessible human rights education, because that will fill that gap that has been highlighted both by the indigenous people's reports, the expert group meetings, and other authoritative human rights reports. Now, for the sake of time, I want to listen to Dina, so I'll be conscious of time. I like her work. I will talk of just three things. Number one is the duality of indigenous people's spaces that really requires the knowledge and the human rights education to make them a reality. Number one is the community space. We all know that international human rights law emphasizes that indigenous peoples should remain as distinct groups, both historically and contemporarily. And you cannot really have that unless you allow some sort of autonomy, to give them some autonomous space within which to exercise their right to self-determined development, or a bit more sensitive in other parts of the world, the right to self-determination. And therefore, you really can't have that unless you have education, both for duty bearers and the rights holders on that first space of the community space where they needed to exercise their right to self-determined development. But another is really the national, belonging to the state, because indigenous people's rights cannot be interpreted in a manner that delinks them, divorces them from the rest of the state. In fact, the state has a duty to implement rights that co-opt them in development processes. So to really make these two spaces a reality, the community space and the belonging to the state to which they identify, education is very important, and the MOOC, I think, is going to catalyze that possibility. Another is the technical nature of some of the human rights of indigenous peoples. I want to really highlight what my colleague Aehshatu has said, Manu here, that indigenous people's rights are not new. By any means, they are not new, because they are enjoyed by mainstream populations as well. And in fact, they are found in all authoritative international human rights treaties. But really, they are context-specific. So in their general recommendations and concluding observations, treaty bodies have highlighted the uniqueness of these rights when it comes to indigenous peoples. And I want to give just two examples for the sake of time. That really these rights are not new to indigenous peoples. They are enjoyed by the mainstream populations, and in fact they are found in authoritative treaty bodies. But when it comes to indigenous peoples, they assume different dimensions. One is the property rights. Really, everyone has a right to property, is a universal right, but treaty monitoring bodies have shown that when it comes to indigenous people, this right acquires autonomous meaning. Right? So it is not an individual right anymore when it comes to indigenous peoples. And this is very important when it comes to reparations for indigenous people's cases, especially when they win cases at the local and international courts and tribunals. Oftentimes, because of lack of that understanding that property rights assume a different dimensions when it comes to indigenous people's rights, we don't really see reparations that are in line with the cultural uniqueness of indigenous peoples, in line with international law. So that's important. Another is cultural rights. Really, again, to agree with Manu, cultural rights is a universal right, very well taken care of by the International Covenant on Economic, Social, and Cultural Rights. But again, when it comes to indigenous peoples, and these are not my words, they have been written extensively by experts and the treaty monitoring bodies, they acquire a very different meaning when they are applied to indigenous peoples, and they cannot be separated from the issues of spirituality and religion. And we have seen, for example, the African Court on Human and People's Rights sitting in Arusha, because Arusha, where I am, is the judicial capital of Africa. We have the court here. And when it was deciding a case involving indigenous communities in Kenya, it really showed the link between cultural rights and the spiritual rights of indigenous peoples. And therefore, these rights need to be understood. They cannot be implemented if they are not understood very well. The last point is really the fact that knowledge is power. We have duty bearers who have to implement indigenous people's rights. And the duty bearers used to be only states, but now we have a long catalog, and I can mention for now transnational corporations, because it's important to remind them that really they have a very important stake in implementation of human rights, especially in the third world, where states really are grappling to attract them to invest as an important source of private funding to catalyze their development processes. And therefore they have the right to, they need to know indigenous people's rights, especially the context specific aspects that I talked about. But equally important is the rights holders. Elsa knows I really, I'm not a big fan of other terminologies, calling indigenous peoples victims, or in multilateral environmental agreements, there's another terminology, they call them stakeholders. And I'm not a big fan of those, because they mask quite a lot of roles and rights that indigenous peoples have as stewards of their lands, territories, and resources. So I prefer the word rights holders, and therefore these rights holders cannot really claim their rights if they don't know them. So it is both sides, the duty bearers as well as the rights holders need to know these rights so that they can claim them. So the MOOC is going to really catalyze, is a catalyst, because it's going to add up. And also I'm cautious, just like as Aehshatu has said, that it depends on accessibility really of the internet, and some part of the world that is still a luxury that is far-fetched, but it's really, really an important step in the right direction. We have a cause that is jointly run by the Center for Human Rights of the University of Pretoria in South Africa, and the International Work Group on Indigenous Affairs, we know by its acronym IGIA. It has been a very important, groundbreaking cause that has reached the government officers, and the ones we have worked with after attending the cause have changed really in terms of understanding the various aspects and situations of indigenous peoples. And I think these are things we can co-share and exchange notes, and we can see how we can benefit from that. With that, I thank you again, Elsa, and I congratulate you again, once again, Sheryl, for the well-deserved appointment. Over to you, Elsa.
Thank you so much, Ellie, and for bringing out also the duty rights holder and duty bearer. So both sides have to know in order to dialogue on the basis of that. That's, I mean, this is really where we are at, I feel, because the rights have been recognized, and we are now at the point that everybody should be able to converse based on that, all the parties. I would like to say that we seem to be a little over time, but it's okay. We have the capacity to stay, of course, longer, because we have, not only because we have one more speaker, but in case we have also some questions to raise. So now the floor is with Bina Nepram, Manipuri from India, founder of the Manipur Women Gun Survivors Network and Global Alliance of Indigenous Peoples, Gender, Justice and Peace. Bina is also an alumna of the International Summer Program on Indigenous Peoples' Rights and Policy, and a dear friend. Bina, the floor is yours.
Mayam Butaramna Okchari, warmest greetings to everyone. Good afternoon, good night, good morning, wherever you are tuning. I understand this has been a wonderful program, and I know many of you have been just staying awake trying to be here. So thank you so much. And take a minute just to take a deep breath and to just feel the energy of the wisdom of many of our co-panelists and the joy that one of the world's largest open programs on Indigenous people's rights have been launched already last year. And it's such a joyous moment. So let us just take this moment to get the good energy of the sun, the moon, the stars, and just be there. Because we could have tons of hours on discussion on Indigenous people's rights, but today is basically on the introduction of this program and how delighted I am to be here. I'm also equally delighted because I happen to know a bit of the American academia. And I was very surprised in this academia, which is a lot of it is based on Western philosophies, Eurocentric approach. How did Professor Elsa Stamatopoulou got Columbia University to host this is a miracle in itself. So this is, and when she started MOOC with all of you, amazing people, and we have heard the story today, I was more amazed. It was like, because her heart is in the right place. Her heart is for Indigenous issues, for people around the world. And I am a product of that. I didn't know I was Indigenous till in 2014, because I grew up in Manipur, a remote mountain region in the Indo-Burma border, a place which is currently having a huge martial law and a place where there is military killing going on right now. I come from such an area. And our people hardly come out of the world. We know we are Indigenous, but the English word Indigenous didn't exist in our vocabulary. We call it Yelhaumi, means the original people. That word I knew, but it was still, again, and people who went from our region to, again, the reason why I'm telling this story is even though we have the UN Indigenous People's Rights Program, we had the UN Declaration, and this time is the 20th session of the UN Indigenous Peoples Permanent Forum. I want us to take a moment of millions of Indigenous people around the world who doesn't know that this forum exists. And this is a reality, and I hope that with MOOC and all of that, we are able to bridge a little bit of that gap. Again, as I mentioned, once I understood that there is a huge global forum on Indigenous people, and I entered for the first time the UN Indigenous Peoples Forum, I was amazed to be in the hall of the United Nations, where I met our brothers and sisters and people from around, folks from around the world at the UN Permanent Forum. The United Nations never looked more colorful than when Indigenous people are there. So it really brought alive how important our story is, our struggle is, and how very few of us are able to even enter that system, and how many more are left behind. It's because I'm always looking for not leaving people behind. That's where my whole life has been dedicated. So in terms of Asia, where I come from, this is home to 2/3 of the world's Indigenous people. 2/3 of the world's Indigenous people come from Asia. And again, as Professor Elsa said, it's 76 million people living in 90 countries. And I love that 35% of the people who have registered for MOOC didn't tell about their countries, because many Indigenous people do not identify with the nation state, you see, for which you want to put them in. So I love this kind of like that. The indigeneity is very, very important, is what I was trying. The other thing is, just to hold, because I know time is running out, is, again, as I mentioned, Michael Foucault, one of the thinkers, had mentioned that prisons, universities, schools, hospitals were created as a part of a structure of what is called for governmentality, for the nation state to govern our lives. So universities fall under that again. But again, to be able to do this MOOC at Columbia, for me, is a really beautiful moment where we can say, as Cecilia and our colleagues said, we have to continue to dialogue, the Indigenous, the non-Indigenous, to be able, because pick up any book, Adam Smith, even pick up Karl Marx, pick up Tocqueville, pick up any theorist. The word they've used for indigenous people is savages. And we aren't. And half of the knowledge learning done in the world do not include us, you see. So I'm really glad that I hope the MOOC and the work done by, the whole thing is not just the MOOC, which we need to, as Cecilia said, create indigenous languages and to be able to get it more out there, but for us to be able to create knowledge, indigenous knowledge systems in the academia, in every part of the world, in Colombia and in university in Africa, in Mizoram University in northeast of India, Yangon University once the shooting stops in Burma. I mean, what we are saying is we have to really create, because it was only in 2014 that even the American Sociological Society started taking indigeneity as a form of studies since all this time, only in 2014. So we have a long way to go to create that knowledge base. And I really hope that this MOOC will start the process of building. We have Sheryl, Lightfoot, and many other academics. Ruana is also one of them, to be able to create indigenous economies, indigenous ways of knowledge bank, indigenous way of indigenous epistemology, if we are borrowing their words, to be able to create that, because it's missing in our universities. With this, again, as I mentioned, that many colleagues from Africa also mentioned, even if we are doing this online, we know that how there's a digital divide in which many indigenous people will not be able to take this course. So how do we, and already the world over, there are already in the information technology, which has left us behind, and how do we get that across? And finally, to quote, that these tools, online tools, are really powerful tools that can link and bridge the gap to be able to share our story, our struggles, and bring about their change. However, obstacles remain, and the poor and the infrastructure is not there. And it is really important, as UNESCO mentioned, that the rise of a global information society must not overshadow the fact that it is valuable as a means to achieve genuine knowledge societies. It's very important. So the kind of online courses that we're doing are knowledge generating tools, but to create that knowledge itself is going to take a while. And I end with a quote of a Navajo Nation Chief Joe Shirley, who said, "Information is not wisdom. Information without value, if it is not available to those who need it. Knowledge combined with the wisdom of our people is what creates true opportunity." And so thank you, Elsa and the whole team at MOOC. We are glad to be a part of it. And let's continue to create this indigenous epistemology in universities here as well as around the world, truly. And I think this is the next step that we got to follow up from UNDRIP and the United Nations Permanent Forum on Indigenous People. Thank you.
Thank you so much, Bina, and bringing in the indigenous epistemologies. So I have been writing down fervently all the various ideas, and I'm thinking that perhaps in the future, in a future iteration of MOOC, what could be done better, and also through the amazing work of Caroline Dometz, who is our assistant on this, we are taking very copious notes of the very interesting comments that people make that are taking this course, so that we can do things better perhaps in the future, or somebody else, that can take this over. But I have picked up some questions that I would like to turn to the panelists quickly before we close.
Elsa, we lost you for a moment. I don't know if you're still there. Okay, now you're back. Now you're back.
Yeah. Regarding the access, the issue of internet access, and is there any idea of how we could imagine this, facilitating this. That is one. The other one is about availability in languages. How could we imagine something like that, this course being available, say, in Spanish somehow? And the other one, for how long will this course be available? Yeah, if you can, I think most of my questions are to Maurice that I have gathered from people's comments and chat. Is Maurice available?
Okay. Yep, I can respond to some of these. So the course right now, one of the easiest ways to get access to the material, say in another language, is really through the YouTube platform. If you go to the videos on YouTube, YouTube offers a pretty interesting and easy to access translate option for the captions, because all the captions have been done by hand. That is, we reviewed them and they're pretty much close to 100%. The translations in any of the languages that they offer is actually fairly good. It is very different than having a native speaker in some other language, but it is an opportunity for anybody who doesn't speak English, who wants to watch the videos, to at least have a way to get captions in their own language. That's one point. I believe the number of languages available are well over a few dozen, so it is pretty comprehensive. The question about the course and how long it will be available, we currently have it available till August of 2021, late August 2021. We are planning to take it down for a short period of time to maybe make some of the adjustments that Elsa mentioned, and then hopefully reopen it again soon afterwards for another period of a year or so. We have had MOOCs that have rerun for 6-7 years, so a course can have a pretty lengthy lifespan. Some have only lasted 2 or 3 years if their information becomes dated. So we'll see how this course will fare in that respect. I think I got all your questions.
Yeah, I think you did. Thank you very much. And I would like to plead then and to ask those that are listening to us today and who, or their friends who might access the course, to give that feedback, because that's important. It's super important. It's too serious a business. And I think we all have put in, it's not the work, but it's mostly the intention that is there to really spread the knowledge. And it will substantively be important for us to get substantive and frank feedback. So I want to invite people. Is there anybody who would like to take the floor before we say goodbye to each other? You can say in chat whether somebody wants to say something that is very important in their mind. Okay. Bina, did you want to say something?
Yes, I just wanted to know like how many people from Asia registered for the course.
Okay. I don't know if Maurice, you have the information on your fingertips.
It might take me like a couple of seconds to look it up. I'll try to find it. If not, I'll have to send it to you.
Otherwise, we'll get back to you. Yeah. Quite a few. Actually, I think that India is the third country, by the way. I think US, Canada have a lot of participants, if I recall. And India, I think, comes after as a third in terms of the numbers, by the way. I think, but we can give you the numbers. Yes, and there is, Maurice, there is also the question, as you are looking, about waiving the cost for verified certificate for the MOOC. What is the process for that?
currently the verified certificate is $50. The edX, the platform that Columbia uses for this course, has a program to offer financial aid for anybody who cannot afford the verified certificate. You would go through their financial aid application to get that either waived or mostly reduced. Columbia doesn't handle the direct financial assistance, but it can be done through edX. And again, I can put out that information on, I think it's on the course itself. If you go to the course information, it has that information.
Okay. And in the meantime, you are looking for the participants from Asia, and somebody's asking also if you are there, whether there's anybody from Brazil. So if you see that, I think there is actually, but I don't remember exactly. So, and then we can close.
Elsa, as Maurice is looking, I want to recognize Kelito. There is someone who has this little children with him right now. So
I can see. Oh,
yeah, the 3 little kids joining us.
How appropriate. We have to make the MOOC accessible for the kids.
Oh, I had a question about this 15 to 74.
Yeah.
Usually when we do work, so is there an age limit? Because I was concerned about the age and at what level, of course, we can start teaching from 1st grade, but then, yeah.
Look, to tell you that, I mean, we can teach from the very beginning, but the thing is this material for a 15-year-old? I would think it would be difficult for a 15-year-old. You don't need to have any university education, in my opinion, to take this course. You know, I pitched it to a general audience, you know, like in human terms, and therefore also the visuals speak. A lot of things speak, and we learn in many different ways, right? So, yeah, but perhaps it's difficult for the 15-year-old. So my hat off, you know, for this kid that is the 15-year-old. And I see here smiling Caroline Dometz, who is our wonderful assistant and who sees all these, each one of these comments, you know, people relating to each other on the platform. It's really beautiful. And when I go there, people become a little community through this course, actually. Yeah, so Maurice told us that we have about 100 people from Asia. He wrote us here. And also about from Brazil, we have, a dozen from Brazil. Okay, okay.
But remember that about 35% of the people who have enrolled have not selected a country of origin. So, and maybe for a number of reasons, but you know, so you can maybe add 35% to all of the numbers if they're spread across evenly.
All right, I would like to thank everybody who participated and the speakers, the panelists for making this course alive through your comments and of course through your expert interviews, and each one of the participants. This is, as Stephanie said at the beginning, it was meant to be like a gift, you know, an offering for anybody who would like to take this. And this as knowledge as a beginning of something, or as a complement, you know, as a complement to your work and to your lives. So with these words, I want to say goodbye, and I will see you in the Zoom corridors of the Permanent Forum on Indigenous Issues. So all the best to everybody. Bye. Bye-bye.